Hey you guys, this is Professor Vitt and welcome to your very first lecture in critical thinking. I am your instructor, Professor Robert Vitt. I'll be making videos throughout, all around my house, so you'll see me in the basement, in the garage. It's wherever I can get at the time to make a video. You see before you a bird leaving a cage here. I just want to give you a short little heads up. This is the metaphor for the class. There's a famous quote by Epictetus, which will come up later. Only the educated are free. And the idea there is that the more knowledge that you gain, the more free you are because you know more about the world. We'll talk about this a little bit later with regard to burden of proof, but the more that you know, the better your informed choices are, the freer and more autonomous you are, the less likely you are to be subject to manipulation by yourself or something else, right? And the more likely your beliefs are to be true. Right here is my email address. If you need to have that, you've got it handy. It's also on the syllabus. So, okay, I'm going to start our very first lecture. I have my handy dandy little cheat sheet here. This cheat sheet is also reflected in, it's also available on the course website too, so you can follow along with that, or you can just watch this video and then review those notes at the end, or you can just watch the video. I don't encourage you to just read this. This alone probably won't give you enough information, and you would end up running the risk of missing some points on quizzes and so forth. All right, here we go. So first things first, the name of this course is Critical Thinking. What is critical thinking about? Well, critical thinking is thinking about thinking. So it's sometimes called metacognition. That's a very fancy word. You do not need to know it. But the idea is that sometimes when we think, we make mistakes. And unless we are aware of how we are thinking, we'll never be able to correct those mistakes. In this class, we're going to study the paranormal. Now, the paranormal is a claim where an event violates the laws of nature or the claims of established science. Some claim that's contrary to science. So why would we be studying this kinds of stuff? Well, the paranormal usually involves ghosts, UFOs, flying saucers, Bigfoot, stuff like that. The reason why we're studying this is because if your thinking works great in these very far out extreme cases, then your thinking is going to work well in cases that are less radical, right? That are more straightforward. So if you can learn how to evaluate a source, if you can learn the best way to think about an extraordinary claim, when you encounter those claims or those sources in other areas of your life, whether it's something political or something economic or something in the kitchen or something in the living room, whatever on the TV, you'll be able to handle it. So also, it's a fun way to learn critical thinking. In my experience, people really like this course because it's not your sort of ho-drum kind of stuff. And I love critical thinking and I love this subject matter, so I hope that you guys will love it too. So here's just a little explanation, right? If we know that these cases work in the most extreme examples, hold on just a second. I got somebody. Did you want to say hi quick? Come on quick. Come on quick. Okay, you say hi.
Hi.
Hi. And you come in here. You got yogurt all over you. Come over here. Say hi.
Hi.
All right, those are my two sons. And they will periodically raid movies. Okay, Daddy's talking, sweetheart. Thank you, bud. They'll periodically show up in a movie. I apologize. It's just part of the process. I keep those interruptions to a minimum, so I apologize in advance. Hopefully, the presence of these other, the handouts will help you kind of avoid some of that stuff. Okay, so here's some examples of what something that is paranormal is, right? Astrology, ghosts, fortune-telling, aliens. Some conspiracy theories share traits with things that are paranormal, but are not themselves technically paranormal. That's okay. We'll talk about conspiracy theories later. Sasquatch would be an example of something that's paranormal because that would be contrary to the claims of established science. A psychic reader, I have that over there too, would also be an example of what paranormal is. So what I'll do here is I will give you guys a little foray into Bigfoot. and you'll be able to kind of get a flavor for what something is that's paranormal, and maybe some idea of some of the stuff that we'll encounter in this course. All right. This is a section on Bigfoot that's taken from a much larger presentation on Bigfoot. So I'm just giving you guys a little slice of it. What you notice right here is a stabilized version of the Patterson-Gimlin film, which is probably the most famous piece of evidence for the existence of Bigfoot. So what we look at with regard to the Patterson-Gimlin film are recordings, right? Or what's left over after we get these eyewitness reports. So essentially these guys came to Northern California in the late 60s, early 70s, and to an area called Bluff Creek. And they said that they encountered this Bigfoot creature walking across a dry riverbed. The creature left these casts, and this person, Roger Patterson, had written a book about Bigfoots, and so it was remarkable that he had run into them. Now, this is the film itself. We no longer have a first edition copy of the film. We don't have a first generation copy of the film, but this is a nice stabilized version of the film as the creature walks across the flatbed. And just for your own purposes, you can kind of judge whether you think it's real or not. Now, when we're thinking about Bigfoot critically, what we're going to do is we're going to think about how we think about whether Bigfoot exists, right? So one of the ways that we think about thinking about Bigfoot is we try to systematize or analyze things in a certain way. So, we might ask, okay, in a more strict way, what's the evidence for Bigfoot, right? Well, we could look at eyewitness accounts, we could look at casts and footprints, we could look at somatic samples, which are a fancy way of saying hair and stuff like that, and we can look at recordings. And on the basis of those, evaluating that evidence, we could try to come to a conclusion as to whether or not Bigfoot exists. Now, there are lots of ways you could go from there, but one of the things that we'll look at here are the Bossberg prints, which are a super famous example of footprints. We'll talk briefly about Jeffrey Meldrum and the hundreds of casts of Bigfoot that he has available to him in his own research lab at a university. University of Iowa, I believe. Iowa or Idaho. And lastly, we'll look at the gold standard problem. Keep your eyes on the gold standard problem. It's definitely tested material on the exam. Okay, so the Bossberg prints were a series of prints that were left in the late 60s in the state of Washington. And an anthropologist at the time, John Napier, went to investigate this sighting and the footprints. And upon looking at these footprints, he said, "I conclude that the deformity was the result of a crushing injury to the foot during early childhood. It's very difficult to conceive of a hoaxer so subtle, so knowledgeable, and so sick who would deliberately fake a footprint of this nature. I suppose it's possible, but it's so unlikely that I'm prepared to discount it." So what this says, and we're not going to go into the details on the Bossberg prints, is, look, Napier looks at these prints, and the way that the prints were cast in the snow and in the ground indicate that one of the creature that left the prints had a club foot. It must have broken its foot early in its youth and then just kind of learned to walk on it, and it healed incorrectly. And so there was always this how do I put it? There was always this kind of deformity in the gait of the creature and how the creature placed its weight on the ground. And when Napier looked at this deformity in the foot, he said, okay, it is certainly possible somebody faked this, but I mean, you'd have to have a PhD in anthropology and specialize in primate locomotion to do it. And it just seems very unlikely that somebody would go through all of that to go put a bunch of prints in the woods, right? So he thought that a hoax was just less remarkable than the real thing. So this is important because Napier's trying to judge alternatives, right? He sees two alternatives. One, this is a hoax. Two, this is real. And he thinks that the idea of a hoax is so unbelievable that it's more likely that it would be real. We'll talk a little bit later in the course framework about something called ECREE, which is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but Napier's using a version of it here. This is Jeffrey Meldrum. He's a tenured university professor. He is a very well-regarded anthropologist. He's published a lot in different areas and in his area of expertise, and he's well-regarded as an anthropologist. But he is, so far as I know, the only anthropologist in the United States that is so forthright with his investigations into Bigfoot and so forth. But he has these casts, and they're available for anybody to see. So if you think that it's a bunch of hogwash involving Bigfoot, Meldrum might say something like, hold on just a second, we've got a little battle. I just want to recap really basically here what we've covered. Some people think one of the areas of evidence for Bigfoot are footprints. And examples of this would be casts that are collected by Jeffrey Meldrum at a university, University of Iowa, in an attempt to gather enough evidence to establish that something's out there really making these casts. And he thinks there's enough uniformity of features in these casts to show that Bigfoot really does exist. John Napier also investigated Bigfoot footprints, and he thought that they were very convincing too, that it was more likely there really was something making footprints than not. Now, is there enough evidence to establish this, right? Well, we could look at the degrees of the people that we've talked about, Napier and Meldrum. Yes, they're experts, so they know what they're talking about, right? They're not just completely uninformed as to, primates and how this would all work and how creatures would interact with an environment and whether they'd have enough food and so forth. But what we'll do is we'll try to focus our attention right now on the question as to whether or not we know these footcasts are real. And the problem that exists when you have footcasts of Bigfoot is called the gold standard problem. This isn't something that I invented. It's something from Benjamin Radford, who's a well-known skeptic. And there are varieties of these kinds of examples out there. Other people have been on to this point too. But the general idea is if you bring me a really good footcast and you say, hey, this one is it, this is the smoking gun, I'd say, well, how do you know that this cast was really made by a Bigfoot? And they'd say, well, it just looks, remarkably correct. The anatomy doesn't seem to be hoaxed. It seems to be consistent, blah, blah, blah. And I say, yes, but you have no track to compare it to, right? So we don't know if it's a real track or not because we don't have any real tracks to work as a standard, right? If I don't have any standard to compare it to, then I don't know whether or not the object is real. And that's the problem with Bigfoot evidence, right? Particularly these tracks. How do we know if it's real? How do we know if this is a real Bigfoot or cast or not? Well, we don't, because we don't have anything to compare it to that's actually been established to be a Bigfoot track. I hope that makes sense. And furthermore, if we do find a track, right, that we think is a convincing evidence, of Bigfoot, we don't know what made the track. We just know that it's a track, and maybe it's made by something that's unidentified that we're not sure of. Well, in that case, we're not sure of what made the track. We need to stop completely, right? We can't just say, oh, nobody knows what made this track, so it must be Bigfoot. That would be an error, right? We've already said we don't know what made it. We can't go beyond that to try and establish that this was a Bigfoot. So this is the gold standard problem. Keep your eye on that for the exam. So just a quick sum up of our little 5-minute Bigfoot example. Remember, we're thinking about how we think about a claim. And one of the ways that we do that in critical thinking is we say, how could I get my thoughts about this claim wrong? And there are lots of different ways we could get our thoughts wrong about a claim. We could have bad sources, we could have bad reasoning, we could have bad evidence, we could have bad logic, right? And we'll go through each of these things as the course progresses. All right, now we're going to move on to why in the heck you'd be taking this class. Why would you study critical thinking? The first reason is you're always thinking, or at least much of the time you are. And so, think about some aspect of your life, brushing your teeth, getting up in the morning, going to work, things that you do at work, things that you do at home, you're always thinking. On some level, you're always kind of running through your day. And so you should try to make sure that the way in which you think is proper or is done in a way that maximizes your true beliefs and minimizes your false ones. All right, another reason. Why study this? Real simple. The better you think, the better you live, right? If you're thinking properly about your decisions, then you're going to make better decisions. And that means evaluating the information that you have properly, evaluating your own thoughts and inferences, conclusions, and so forth, and deductions regarding those claims. So the better that you think, the better that you live, right? You will be less likely to be taken advantage of financially or psychologically and so forth. So better thinking is better living. And in that sense, I do think that this course has a straightforward impact on your life and the quality of the decisions that you make. So I think it's an important course. By the way, I'm not completely naive. I don't think it's your most important course ever in your life. But I think that this course will allow you to apply tools in other areas of your life. All right. Next point about why to study this. I brought this up a little bit earlier. We want to maximize our true beliefs and minimize our false ones, right? I want to believe as many true things as I possibly can, whatever that ends up being, right? I don't want what I want to be true. I want what is true, and I want to believe the things that are true. So that's kind of one of the focuses of this class, help you minimize bad thinking. And bad thinking is similar to thinking that results in false beliefs rather than true ones. All right, another point. Why study this? Lots of people believe in paranormal beliefs, right? This is just a link to a Gallup poll that I found online, but you cannot just dismiss every extraordinary claim that you come across out of hand, right? If someone really is psychic and they're able to see without the use of their immediate central nervous system and they're just using their brain or their spirit or whatever, that's a big deal. And that should at least be investigated, right? And if we can understand what those claims are, then we can understand the burden of proof that they face. In other words, we can understand what those claims would have to do in order to be accepted as true or likely to be true. And then lastly, another reason for studying paranormal beliefs, they're a ton of fun, right? I mean, I just think these are really fun stories and great examples, and I think that generally speaking, it's much more entertaining than just some dry critical thinking exercise. All right. One of the last reasons here with regard to why you would study this, the consequences are big, right? If some of these paranormal beliefs are true, like, for instance, astrology, then lots of stuff that we know about physics and astronomy, chemistry, biology, all that stuff would be wrong. And we owe it to ourselves to determine whether those things are false or not, right? If someone is able to speak to the dead or see behind a closed door without, opening it, right? Then humans can do amazing, wonderful things that we've never known about before. Can you imagine if we really did have someone who was psychic, someone who's clairvoyant? In other words, they could see without the immediate use of their eyes or ears. They could perceive with another sight, right? It's sometimes called second sight. My gosh, if we really could find someone like that, could you imagine the benefit to people who've lost a child or a family member, right? I mean, people go missing all the time. And if we really do have psychics who could find those people, then my gosh, we should make use of it, right? Similarly, we could ask a psychic, hey, where's the tomb of Cleopatra, right? It's never been found. We're not sure whether it's underwater or it's been looted, but if somebody really was psychic, then we could have them find out conclusively for us and we could go to that place. Also, sometimes people claim to be psychic or spiritual surgeons. Gosh, if those people really could cure diseases, we better get them lined up because we got lots of people with diseases, right? So part of what we're doing here is we're saying, gosh, we need to take these claims at their face and determine whether they're true, because if they're true, there would be huge ramifications throughout the world. Okay. Oh, one quick thing I want to point out here before the end, and I mentioned this in the syllabus video earlier. I don't grade you on whether or not you believe in Bigfoot or UFOs or psychics. In some sense, it has absolutely no importance to me whatsoever, right? I really don't care what you think. I care how you think and that you think properly. And so I will never ask you a grade, are psychics real, right? And if you answer it wrong, you're going to get an F. Or are ghosts real, or UFOs, or reincarnation, any of it, right? I'm never going to ask that. It's just not relevant to the course. What's relevant to the course is, what reasons do you have for thinking that this is true, right? And how do you answer the criticisms that are levied against that side, etc., etc., etc. So keep that in mind. Nobody's being quizzed on whether they believe in this stuff or not. It's just merely for fun and entertainment purposes. Okay, the next video is going to be a course roadmap, but I'm going to break this one up now, and I encourage you guys to look through the outline that I just ran through. It's 1 through 5 in the document, and make sure that you understand each of those points. I'm pretty sure I'm good to go on all of them. Yeah, we're good. Okay, you guys, look forward to seeing you in the next video.